I stared at the pawn shop receipt in my trembling hands, my late husband's wedding ring reduced to a mere transaction number. But it wasn't the betrayal that made me smile. It was what Vanessa didn't know about the ring's engraving and what I was about to do next. My name is Helen Morrison. I'm 67 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I had a stroke that nearly killed me. The doctors said I was lucky to survive, lucky to remember my own name, lucky to walk again. What they didn't know was that surviving wasn't the hard part. It was coming home to find my wedding ring missing that nearly finished me off. I'd been married to Robert for 41 years before he passed. That ring lived on my finger through every anniversary, every argument, every moment of joy and sorrow we shared. When the hospital made me remove all jewelry before surgery, I placed it carefully in my jewelry box, right next to Robert's old watch, right where it belonged. But the box was empty when I got home. My daughter-in-law Vanessa was fussing around the kitchen when I confronted her. "Oh, Helen," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I moved it for safekeeping, with the house being empty and all." Her voice had that practiced tone people use when they're telling half-truths. I'd heard it plenty in my years of business dealings. Then she mentioned something about insurance purposes. Insurance purposes. For a ring that never left my jewelry box? Makes sense, right? Well, it made no sense to me. Vanessa had always been careless with details, but this felt different. Calculated. The way she kept wiping her hands on that dish towel, like she was trying to clean off something that wouldn't wash away. I waited until she left for her yoga class, because of course she had yoga class during my first week home from the hospital. Then I did what any reasonable woman would do. I searched her purse. The receipt was folded neatly behind her credit cards. Morrison's Pawn and Gold, $3,000. My Robert's ring, reduced to a transaction number on a crumpled piece of paper. But here's what Vanessa didn't know about that ring. Robert had it specially engraved when we renewed our vows in 1976. H&R Forever, 1976, with a tiny serial number that only I memorized. Not exactly the kind of detail you share at dinner parties. The next morning, I took a cab to Morrison's Pawn and Gold. Ironic name, considering. The owner, a surprisingly gentle man named Eddie, remembered the transaction perfectly. "Beautiful piece," he said. "Shame someone had to let it go." He showed me the security footage on his grainy monitor. There was Vanessa, clear as day, but she wasn't alone. A tall man with graying temples stood beside her, too close for comfort, too familiar with her movements. His hand rested on the small of her back, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Eddie mentioned they seemed to know each other very well. Very well indeed. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a stolen ring. This was about my son Michael's entire life being systematically dismantled by the woman he trusted most. And the weird part is, Vanessa probably thought she was so clever, stealing from a stroke victim who might not even remember what she'd lost. But I remembered everything, every detail, every number, every face. What Vanessa didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that behind my sweet grandmother exterior lived someone who'd spent decades building a small fortune through careful investments and strategic partnerships. Someone who understood that real power comes from staying invisible until the exact moment you choose to strike. I bought my ring back from Eddie that afternoon, paid full price without haggling. Then I sat in that pawn shop, holding Robert's ring in my palm, and made a decision that would change everything. The investigation I was about to launch would uncover betrayals far worse than theft. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. I wasn't about to sit around knitting while my daughter-in-law destroyed my son's life. The next morning, I called Marcus Webb, a private investigator I'd worked with years ago during some business disputes. Marcus was the kind of man who could find a needle in a haystack and tell you exactly how it got there in the first place. "Helen Morrison," he said when he picked up the phone. "Heard you had some health troubles. How are you feeling?" Like someone who needs to know where her daughter-in-law goes when she's not at yoga class. Marcus didn't ask questions. That's why I liked him. Within 2 days, he had answers that made my blood pressure spike higher than my cardiologist would have appreciated. Vanessa's yoga classes were actually coffee dates with Derek Santos, a smooth-talking business consultant with perfectly styled hair and a smile that probably worked on younger women. They met 3 times a week at a little cafe downtown. Very cozy, very romantic, very married to someone else. But the affair was just the appetizer. The main course was much more expensive. Marcus discovered that Derek had helped Vanessa set up 2 shell companies with names so boring they could cure insomnia: Premier Business Solutions and Executive Administrative Services. Sounds official, right? Well, these companies existed for one purpose: to steal money from my son's accounting firm. Here's how their little scheme worked. Vanessa would create fake invoices from these shell companies for services that never existed, marketing consultations that never happened, administrative support that was never provided, executive training sessions that trained nobody. Then she'd approve the payments herself, since Michael had given her access to handle routine business expenses. Smart? Maybe, but not smart enough. What made me laugh, and I mean actually laugh out loud in my empty house, was that Vanessa thought she was stealing from Michael's business. She had no idea that every dollar she took was coming straight out of my pocket. You see, when Michael started his accounting firm 5 years ago, he needed a silent partner, someone with capital but no interest in day-to-day operations, someone who believed in him enough to let him think he was running his own show. That someone was me, though I kept that information quieter than a church mouse. I owned 60% of Morrison & Associates through a holding corporation called Steadfast Holdings. Michael knew he had a silent partner, but he assumed it was some investment group Marcus had connected him with. He never asked too many questions, and I never volunteered too many answers. Every month, I received detailed financial reports. Every major decision crossed my desk for approval. Every bank account required dual signatures, Michael's and mine, though mine came through Steadfast Holdings. I'd been watching Vanessa's little withdrawals for months, wondering when Michael would notice the irregularities. He never did. Love makes people blind to a lot of things, including missing money. The deeper Marcus dug, the worse it got. Vanessa had been inflating office supply orders and pocketing the difference. She'd been billing fake travel expenses for business trips that never happened. She'd even been charging Michael's company for professional development courses that were actually spa weekends with Derek. The total came to just over $52,000, not enough to bankrupt the business, but enough to seriously damage it, and definitely enough to send someone to prison. Then Marcus uncovered Derek's background, and the whole picture became crystal clear. Derek Santos wasn't just a business consultant. He was a professional fraud artist with convictions in 2 other states. He'd pulled the same routine with at least 3 other women, always targeting wives who had access to their husbands' business accounts. Vanessa wasn't Derek's partner in crime. She was his mark. And she was so busy falling for his charm that she never realized she was being played just as hard as she was playing Michael. But here's where Derek made his fatal mistake. He underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. When you target someone's family, you better make sure that someone isn't capable of destroying you completely. I spent the next week gathering evidence like I was preparing for the trial of the century. Bank records, email communications, security footage from the cafe where they met, photos of Derek entering Vanessa's house while Michael was at work, even receipts from the fancy restaurants where they celebrated each successful theft. Marcus was thorough, almost frighteningly so. He discovered that Derek had been married twice before, both marriages ending when his wives discovered his criminal activities. He had outstanding warrants in Nevada. He owed back taxes in California. He was, in every possible way, a complete disaster of a human being. And Vanessa thought she was going to run away with this man and live happily ever after on money stolen from her own husband. The comedy of it almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. While I was building my case, Vanessa was getting bolder. She started staying out later, making more elaborate excuses, stealing larger amounts. She even had the nerve to suggest that Michael hired Derek as a permanent business consultant. "He's really helped me understand the financial side of things," she told Michael over dinner one night. I was there, playing the role of recovering stroke victim who needed family support. Maybe we should bring him on officially. Michael actually considered it. My sweet, trusting son was about to hire the man who was sleeping with his wife and stealing his money. The irony was so thick you could have served it for dessert. That's when I decided it was time to end this charade. I'd gathered enough evidence to destroy them both 10 times over. I had documentation that would make prosecutors weep with joy. I had leverage that would make Derek Santos wish he'd never heard the name Morrison. But I wasn't going to turn everything over to the authorities just yet. That would be too quick, too clean, too merciful for what they'd done to my family. I had something much more satisfying in mind. Something that would give them a chance to confess their crimes before facing the full consequences. Something that would let Michael hear the truth directly from his wife's mouth before deciding what to do about it. I was going to invite them all to dinner. A lovely family gathering where we could discuss business, relationships, and the fascinating topic of trust between married couples. Marcus had just delivered the final piece of evidence I needed, and I was ready to serve justice alongside the main course. After all, what's a family dinner without a few surprises? The dinner party I planned wasn't your typical family gathering. I set the table with my best china, the kind Robert and I saved for special occasions. Candles flickered just right. Everything looked perfect for what was about to become the most memorable meal of Vanessa's life. Michael arrived first, carrying flowers and wearing that hopeful smile he'd inherited from his father. Sweet boy still thought his wife was just going through a rough patch. Vanessa showed up 20 minutes late, which was typical. What wasn't typical was the nervous energy radiating off her like heat from a furnace. "Helen, you look wonderful," she said, kissing my cheek. Her hands were shaking slightly, guilty conscience perhaps. I waited until we'd finished the appetizers before placing a small velvet box next to my plate. Vanessa's eyes locked onto it immediately. Her face went 3 shades paler than the dinner rolls. "I wanted to share something with you both," I said, opening the box to reveal Robert's ring. "Look what I found at Morrison's Pawnee, and gold." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked confused. Vanessa looked like she was about to faint into her soup. "That's impossible," Vanessa whispered. "I told you, the ring is in my safety deposit box for insurance." "Funny thing about pawn shops," I interrupted gently. "They keep excellent records, security cameras too. Would you like to see the footage of you selling my husband's ring?" Michael's fork clattered onto his plate. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering immediately, I reached for my purse and pulled out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Well, son, it seems your wife has been quite busy while I was recovering from my stroke." The bank statements came out first. Every fraudulent transaction highlighted in yellow. The shell company invoices, the fake expense reports, the hotel receipts from romantic getaways charged to Michael's business account. Vanessa tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. "Then there's Derek Santos," I continued, sliding photos across the table. "Charming man. Did you know he's wanted in Nevada for embezzlement, or that he's pulled this exact same scheme with 3 other women?" Michael stared at the photos of his wife embracing another man. His face crumpled like paper in a fire. "The total theft comes to $52,347, I said matter-of-factly. "That's a felony in this state." Vanessa finally found her voice. "You can't prove any of this. Those could be doctored photos, fake documents." "You're right," I smiled. "Which is why I've already turned copies over to the district attorney, along with testimony from witnesses, security footage, and Derek's complete criminal history." But here's the part that made me genuinely happy. I reached for one final document. "Michael, there's something else you should know about your business partner." His eyes met mine, confused and heartbroken. "Steadfast Holdings isn't some investment group," I said softly. "It's me. I've been your silent partner for 5 years, which means every dollar Vanessa stole came directly from my accounts." The color drained from Vanessa's face completely. As majority owner, I've frozen all business accounts she had access to. The stolen money has been recovered with interest. Derek's consulting contract has been terminated. I folded my hands. And as of this morning, both Derek and Vanessa are facing criminal charges. Michael looked between us, processing everything. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were funding the business?" "Because you needed to believe in yourself, but you also needed protection from people who would take advantage of your trust." Vanessa stood suddenly, knocking over her wine glass. "You vindictive old witch. You planned this whole thing. Actually, dear," I said calmly. "You planned this whole thing. I just decided how it would end." The police arrived 30 minutes later. Derek Santos was arrested at his apartment, where officers found detailed plans for targeting 2 other wealthy families in the area. Apparently, my family wasn't his first rodeo, and we definitely weren't going to be his last. Watching Vanessa being read her rights at my dining room table was oddly satisfying. She kept looking at me like I'd somehow cheated by catching her red-handed. The audacity was almost impressive. "This isn't over," she hissed, as they led her away in handcuffs. "Oh, sweetheart," I replied. "It absolutely is." Michael stayed after the police left. We sat in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal, and he cried. Real tears for the marriage he thought he had and the woman he thought he knew. "I should have seen it," he kept saying. "No, son, you loved her. That's not a character flaw." The legal proceedings moved faster than I expected. Derek's criminal history made him a flight risk, so no bail. Vanessa's family hired an expensive lawyer who took one look at my evidence and advised her to take a plea deal. She got 18 months in minimum security. Derek got 4 years in a considerably less pleasant facility. Michael threw himself into rebuilding the business. I officially transferred my ownership stake to him, though I insisted on staying involved as an advisor. "Someone needs to watch out for the next Vanessa," I told him. He laughed, actually laughed. First time I'd heard that sound in months. The ring sits in my jewelry box now, right next to Robert's watch where it belongs. Sometimes I catch myself talking to it, telling Robert about the adventure we had getting it back. I think he would have enjoyed watching Vanessa's face when she realized she'd messed with the wrong family. Michael's doing better now. He's cautious about dating, but that's probably healthy after what happened. He stops by every Sunday for dinner, and we never eat off the good china. Those plates are reserved for special occasions only, like the next time someone tries to steal from my family. Derek got out of prison last month and immediately violated his parole by attempting to run another scam in Arizona. He's back behind bars for another 3 years. Some people never learn. Vanessa sends letters occasionally, asking for forgiveness. I haven't opened a single one. After all, some betrayals don't deserve second chances.